Welcome to the midterm exam review for Dan Kleber's Human Growth and Behavior at Labouré College. Lifespan perspective has got a long and drawn out description, but there are a few things that we would probably want to pay attention to. It is lifelong, going from conception to death. It is multi-dimensional, having lots of different components that are important. It is multi-directional, in that some part of us might be expanding while other parts are contracting, and it's capable of change. Contextualism, within the lifespan description, includes normative age-graded influences in which things happen to individuals all about the same age, like losing your first tooth or going into retirement. It's not important whether or not it's biological or social in its origin. It's important that it happens to most people about the same age. Normative history-rated influences, which are situations, they're influences that happen to a particular generation of people. They are situated in history, but they don't happen to all generations. The 9/11 attacks affected the people alive at this time differently than those people who come later and read about it in history books. The Great Depression affected the people who were alive at that time differently than those of us who read about it in history books. So it affects people who are situated in history. Non-normative life events are the occurrences that have an influence on someone's life, but they are either very distinct, very individual, or there isn't a particular time in which something like that happens. So it might be that you win the lottery, and that's something which is exceedingly rare. That would be a non-normative life event. But it could also be something like your parents get divorced, which could happen to half the population, but it can happen at different times in our life. There is no particular time in which that happens. And if it happened to us when we were 5, that would affect us differently than if it happened to us when we were 15, or which would affect us differently than if it happened to us when we were 35. Some large developmental issues, a couple of which we told you to pay attention to. Nature versus nurture. Nature is what we receive biologically, our genetics, our biological inheritance. Nurture is what happens to us from the time we're born till the time we die. It's not just about our nurturing relationships, but essentially what is our life experience. The other one we asked you to pay attention to was continuity versus discontinuity. And that was exemplified by the acorn to the oak tree and the caterpillar to the butterfly. Is life divided up into um, uh, qualitatively different stages, or is it really one continuous process in which every experience, every phase of development builds on another? 5 theoretical orientations to development. The psychoanalytic perspective, originated by Freud, is that we have these internal dynamic forces that are in conflict, and they shape the personality. Most of this is in the unconscious mind, and so we're not really aware of what makes us tick, ultimately. Cognitive approach is that thoughts are most important. Uh, but when we look at how we think and what we think in developmental terms, we're really looking at how it is that children, infants, children, adolescents, adults think differently. And what are they capable of doing? Is it just a matter of accumulated experience, or are there different capabilities that we can attribute to an infant and different capabilities that we attribute to all those different phases of life? Behavioral and social cognitive approaches are learning approaches. So the behavioral is more kind of a strict, everything you do is learned. Everything that significantly distinguishes you from the person sitting next to you, given that you're both humans, is learned. You start with the same basic equipment, and then it's all about what kinds of experiences you have, what kind of environment you have. The environment including everything you ever experience. Social cognitive theory is also a learning approach, but emphasizes that we early on do a lot of imitating. And then we sort of fine-tune, like the behaviorists, we fine-tune what gets reinforced, we do more often, what gets punished, we do less often. It involves a little bit more interaction between us and the environment. I guess the social cognitive approach is that it's not a one-way street. We affect the environment as much as the environment affects us as well. The ethological approach was Konrad Lorenz, the guy swimming across the pond with the geese following him. So his emphasis is that we have a lot of behavior which is genetically programmed, and we learn most effectively during these particular critical periods of time or sensitive periods of time. And our biology is in our genetics are geared for us to learn language at a certain time and to learn to walk at a certain time and to maybe make relationships at a certain time. That if we miss those opportunities, it gets harder and harder the farther we get from that window. So it's harder and harder to learn language. If you've never learned to speak, it would be hard to do that at 15, when most of us do that at 1, 2, 3 years of age. The ecological theory was Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and he was looking at that model, the concentric model of influences on our development. He focused on the individual in the center and the influences that are most directly upon us, like our family and friends, are in the microsystem, and then the farther and farther we get out in those concentric circles, the more diffuse the influences are. So if we look particularly at Freud's theory, we're looking at sexual impulses because he was saying there was a strong instinctual biological urge in terms of evolution. If we don't reproduce, our species doesn't exist. So he's saying, hey, look, if we're at the top of the evolutionary ladder, then we have to have a strong sexual impulse. Why not food? Well, yes, we do have we do have strong impulses to eat and for self-preservation and all that. But what he would argue is we're not conflicted about any of that. We're not really conflicted about whether or not we should eat or whether or not we should try to get to the top of the water if we fall into a pond. There's no conflict. Where the psychological turmoil comes in is that society has a lot of regulation about how we should be sexual. And so his idea is we have a strong instinctual urge to be sexual, and we have an equally strong societal control put upon us. And we internalize that, and that becomes the source of a lot of internal psychological tension. 5 stages, oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital, are centered around erogenous zones, sensitive areas of development, areas in which we would get the most gratification at a certain particular developmental point. Erikson is also a psychoanalytic theorist, but his focus was more on people. And he argued that the relationships between people is the key dynamic force going on in our unconscious mind. Can we trust our parents? Is the world a safe place? Is the world an unsafe place, and do we need to be wary about what's going to happen next? And he said, so each of these 8 stages that he developed was always a this versus that, trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt. There was always sort of a most positive end and a most negative end. And he wasn't really arguing that you should be all one or all the other. It's a little bit of skepticism. You shouldn't go around trusting everybody. He's not arguing you should trust everybody and that the world is a peachy place. But what he is saying is that people are going to who are going to do best in their lives lean toward the positive. So they are more trusting than mistrusting. They are more autonomous than filled with shame and doubt, that sort of thing. Here are his 8 stages. Now, we only cover, I believe, the first 4 of them in the first half of the class, so those are the ones you probably are going to be most concerned with. Piaget's cognitive theory is about organizing internal representations of our experience. So we take these bits of pieces, we find the relationships between them, we create these schemas inside our heads, and these collections of concepts that seem to be related form the basis of our thoughts. There are 4 stages of development, and the sensory motor, preoperational, concrete operational, and formal operational. And again, I think we only got up to pre-operational at this point, so that's where you would want to focus your most attention. I would take a look at the sub-stages that exist in there, maybe particularly in the pre-operational stage. Vygotsky, the sociocultural cognitive theory, is similar to Piaget in that we have to construct this internal image. But Piaget was really kind of focusing, when our brains are capable of thinking these things, we will think these things. No matter what our situation is, we'll just apply our newfound cognitive processes to whatever our environment is. Vygotsky argued that our social surroundings, our opportunities made a big difference. We can be helped along by people trying to teach us things. Now there is a limit. You can't teach a 4-year-old algebra. So there are some things that you just can't learn at some ages, and some things that are very easy for you. But with a little bit of help, some people can, or lots of people can learn faster and more. So his idea is different from Piaget's in that our cognitive development can be influenced by those around us. Information processing theory is it compares our own developmental process to the processing of a computer, about how we take information in and we store and then retrieve it. Skinner's operant conditioning is a learning approach. This is kind of strict behaviorism. You take an action in the environment, and if something happens that's good, if you're rewarded or reinforced, then you're more likely to take that action again. If you take an action in the environment and whatever follows it is a punishment, something you don't like, then you're less likely to take that action again. Bandura's social cognitive theory, we mentioned before, behavior, environment, cognition are much more interactive. So what we think an experience is determines whether or not we see it as a reward or a punishment. We influence the environment as much as the environment influences us, and our behavior is the result of that. The ethological approach, strong emphasis on biology. It's tied to evolution, and don't forget about the critical periods or sensitive periods of development. Bronfenbrenner we mentioned before, microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, chronosystem. The only one that probably, because each of them gives you sort of clear examples, the only one that maybe warrants some bit of explanation is the mesosystem, because there's nothing set in the mesosystem. In the mesosystem, you find kind of unique interactions between members that don't always interact. So, for instance, you might have a set of environments or a set of influences that affect you when you're a school, or when you're when you're a kid in school. And you might also have a set of expectations that affect you when you're at home. But on teacher-parent night, those two worlds collide, and that might be like a whole different kind of experience. Not just a blend of the two, but really a whole third sort of learning or influential experience. There we see some examples in the model that you have in the book. The chronosystem is kind of like normative history graded influences, stuff that happens to particular people at a particular time. Research designs, we have a couple of main options. The first one we look at is correlational studies. Correlational studies measure the strength of relationships between two variables. A correlation coefficient is a numeric representation of the strength of that relationship, and the strongest it can possibly get is +1 or -1. Right in the middle of that, of course, is 0, which means no relationship at all. A positive correlation means that two variables go up and down together. Like the more Dunkin' Donuts I eat, the more I weigh. The less Dunkin' Donuts I eat, the less I weigh. All right, so these two variables go up and down together. If they're moving in the same direction, it's a positive correlation, regardless of whether or not it's going up or going down. A negative correlation is when two variables go in opposite directions. So let's say the more cardiovascular exercise I do, the lower my risk for heart disease. The less cardiovascular exercise I do, the greater my risk for heart disease. So these two variables move in opposite directions. So those are negative correlations. And one is not stronger than the other. It's just a way of describing the two. What correlations cannot do is prove cause and effect. To demonstrate cause and effect, you have to eliminate the possibility that any other variable could be involved. So we use experiments. Experiments control for cause and effect by dividing people into groups, applying one group that they think is going to have an impact. That's going to be the independent variable. And then measuring the outcome, which is going to be the dependent variable. Supposedly, if you had two groups and one group got the headache medicine and the other group didn't, we would expect to see that headaches go away at a greater rate in the group that got the headache medicine than the group that didn't. We don't really know until, well, we don't know at this point if this is really a fair cause and effect response. Maybe all the people in the group that got the medicine were going to lose their headaches anyway. And so randomization of variables comes into play. If everybody in the research had an equal chance to go to either group, like a flipping of a coin, then every variable they walked in the door with also had a chance to go to either group. And if you have a large enough group, then it did. You've got some people with stubborn headaches in one group and some people with stubborn headaches in the other group. And you got some people whose headaches were going to go away anyway and some people whose headaches were going to go away in the other way in the other group. All the variables get distributed evenly, even if you don't know what they are. All you need is enough people and a random way of distributing everybody to each group. Then, if you apply your independent variable, the only thing that makes these two groups different, right, if they all had this, they all had a wide spectrum of variables in them. The only variable that makes them different is the headache medicine we gave to one group, or the independent variable that we didn't give to the other group. So we have an experimental group, they get the independent variable. The control group doesn't get it. Maybe they get a placebo, maybe they get